So now I'd like to invite my panelists up to join me here. And I am going to very quickly introduce everyone. I will refer you to the program to read more about their very impressive careers. We have a very tight schedule. It's my job to keep us on time, so this is literally going to be a lightning round. We also want to invite all of you to be a part of this conversation, so we're going to kick things off pretty quickly and then open things up for questions, open the mic up for questions. So let me have a seat. When you want to speak, it is sort of like giving testimony. So thanks for being here. Can you hear me back there? Let me move this a little closer. So to my right, I have John Douglas, who is a partner at Davis Polk's Financial Institutions Group and also a volunteer and chairman of the board for the Financial Services Volunteer Corps, which is a founding member of VEGA. Oh, wait. I'm out of order. Sorry, guys. John Ellenberger, to my right.
We're all to your right.
Thank you. John Ellenberger, Land O'Lakes International Development CEO and president. And we've got Ed Keturakis, who is with CNFA, also a founding member of VEGA, Culting New Frontiers in Agriculture, and Ryan Donovan, again, who introduced the congressman. So I'm going to kick things off pretty quickly here and first ask each of you to just say a few words about why you're here and how you and your organization are connected with VEGA.
Do you have an order in mind, or do we just go? Sure. FSVC was a founder of VEGA, or one of the founding members of VEGA, and we're delighted to participate. FSVC was formed in 1990 at the behest of President Bush to help the Eastern European countries that had just left the orbit of Russia to develop sound capital markets and banking systems. And since 1990, FSVC has sent thousands of volunteers, primarily lawyers, bankers, accountants, investment bankers, regulators, into Eastern Europe, Russia, Southeast Asia, Sub-Saharan Africa, Middle East, North Africa, to help them really develop economies, inclusive economies. And I think our relationship with VEGA and our work and support that we've received from the U.S. government is really critical to our being able to do what I view as some of the most important work in the world. So that's why I'm here, other than being asked, which was nice.
Thanks, John. Ed?
Sure, thank you. Red is on, yes?
Yes.
Okay. So CNFA used to be called Citizens Network for Foreign Affairs, and now we're cultivating new frontiers in agriculture. Since our start in 1985, really working with the private sector has been a part of our DNA. We began our work in helping large multinational corporations like John Deere, ADM, and Cargill enter the Soviet markets after the fall of the Soviet Union. And we helped them to establish joint partnerships with entrepreneurs on the ground. We've been with VEGA since its inception, and we've worked since the early 90s with the Farmer to Farmer program, where we've sent over 3,000 volunteers, volunteer assignments overseas during that period up till now. We've also held a few contracts under VEGA and a few cooperative agreements. We started in Iraq and Afghanistan with programs to develop value chains there, working in partnership with IESC and ACDI VOCA on those programs. And currently, we're implementing a large horticulture development program in Egypt, and it's focused on export markets and introducing standards into the horticultural value chain to help farmers get access to European markets most typically. And it was mentioned earlier, we are implementing this partnership between USAID and Nestle in northern Nigeria, which seeks to reduce the levels of aflatoxin and mycotoxins and other contaminants like aluminum in the maize and soy value chains. And through this work, we've really worked broadly with the private sector. Since we've started, we've brought other private sector on board with us, such as Olem, Syngenta. They're very interested in our work and want to partner with us. So again, working with VEGA, working with volunteers, but also working with the private sector is a part of the reason that we're in the mix with the VEGA executing members.
Thanks so much, Ed. And John, let me see if I can correct the record. I think I gave you a promotion. John Ellenberger
Don't back it away.
is the Senior Vice President for Land O'Lakes International Development.
Now I can go home. That's
right.
good. I won't be thrown out. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is John Ellenberger. I represent Land O'Lakes International Development. I'm guessing in this crowd, I don't really have to explain, perhaps, some of the development aspects that have been a part of our organization for a long time. But just to refresh the memories for those that might not know, Land O'Lakes is a farmer-owned cooperative founded nearly 100 years ago. It's quite an organization that's been growing tremendously and reaches about a quarter of all corn and soybean farmers and about 50% of all the acres in the United States, along with a business that is primary in the area of animal nutrition under the Purina brand, and then the dairy foods business that I'm sure all of you are well aware of as U.S. citizens. What you may not be as aware of is that we've had 40 years of doing international development work. We've been in 80 different countries around the world. Like the other folks at the table, we are founding partners and members of VEGA, proud to be so. We're a group that has done a number of different pieces of work for VEGA over the years through VEGA in countries like Afghanistan and Yemen, and currently in Sri Lanka, and more to come on that. What's unique about Land O'Lakes, I think, as it relates to why we're here, is that we're a company of about 10,000 employees. So we have a terrific resource of people that we can and do draw from for volunteer opportunities. We got into this business of being in the development business because farmers are many things, and have many things, but one of the things they have are big hearts. They define the neighborhood largely, and increasingly globally, and that is why they steered their resources in part to go to international development work. And we're proud to say that through VEGA and through with Farmer to Farmer throughout, we've had a long history of doing some great work sponsored by USAID and others. Thank you.
Well, as I was introduced earlier, I'm Ryan Donovan with the Credit Union National Association, and I think I'm here because I was a volunteer on a VEGA project earlier this year that World Council of Credit Unions is working to implement in Ukraine. It's the Credit for Agriculture Producer program, and it's a 4-year program that's funded by USAID and implemented by World Council with the assistance of VEGA. And the idea here is that we want to strengthen the credit union sector in Ukraine so that the quality of financial services products that are offered to farmers and to agribusiness in rural areas of Ukraine is improved. My role and my mission there was essentially threefold. One, I wanted to get a better understanding of the challenges that were facing Ukrainian credit unions as they work to serve their members. I had the opportunity to meet with Ukrainian government officials to talk to them a little bit about the U.S. credit union system, our governance structure, our tax structure, and our regulatory structure. And I also worked to train Ukrainian credit union leaders in essential tools of advocacy. As I said, I spent about a week there, and my takeaways were essentially that the credit unions in Ukraine have many of the same challenges that credit unions in the United States face, particularly in terms of the restrictions on who they can serve and also their perceived relevancy to borrowers. The government in Ukraine seems to have a similar struggle with understanding credit unions and the role that they might play in helping Ukraine and its economy grow. But credit union leaders there are just as eager as credit union leaders in the United States to see their system grow and advocate on behalf of their members. And my overall impression was that Ukraine is looking westward, not eastward. They're looking forward, not backwards. There's a lot of opportunity there, and this program is going to be successful as much a result of our efforts there as it is the efforts of the Ukrainians on the ground that want to embrace the credit union model and work to further develop it. So I was real pleased to have the opportunity to volunteer in Ukraine and wish the best for the program.
Terrific. Thanks, Ryan, and thanks for volunteering. I would like to learn a little bit more about the Biz Plus program from you, John Ellenberger. I think that this is one example of how the partnership with USAID can truly generate jobs and raise incomes. The statistics are pretty impressive over the years, the number of jobs from the program in Sri Lanka. Direct jobs, more than 6,000. Indirect jobs, more than 4,000. Incomes, gross household incomes have risen more than $9 million. So can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Sure, I can. I have had the good fortune of going out and having a chance to see this particular project in action. Spent about a week and a half in Sri Lanka, and can speak firsthand to the impact that is being achieved through this program. It's a unique program. It's unique for us. It's unique, I think, in the area. It started back in 2011. Land O'Lakes had done a couple of dairy-focused development projects in Sri Lanka, so we had a history in the country. But the scope and scale and intent of this program were quite different. It recognized the fact that after a 30-year civil war, you might remember the Tamil Tigers and all of the challenges that occurred within that country for years and years. Peace was achieved, and the U.S. government interest was in driving the kind of stability that was mentioned earlier, to try to drive economies and jobs and opportunity, and they need people to figure out ways to help accomplish that. So USAID, through the VEGA mechanism, started the Biz Plus program. It's a program that focuses on investing, making capital investments to local operations, businesses that are matched, and then some. So the program overall has invested something around $10 million in capital grants, but that's been nearly doubled with nearly $18 million of partner investment that have in part driven the outcome of new jobs that Angela mentioned a minute ago. What's also unique about this program is even though we are an agricultural-oriented development group, only probably a little less than half of the approximate 50 organizations that have benefited or been invested in by this program are ag-related. In fact, with the intent of growing jobs and a more vibrant economy, the project has invested in about 50 different companies and organizations in 10 different industries. So it's a very broad-based effort to try to drive economic improvement. It's not just money, though. It's money, but it is also importantly managerial and technical advice and counseling. Many of these organizations that we're partnering with are at that stage where the entrepreneur who started the organization is choosing to move on, or they're family organizations that have reached a certain scale. But the challenge is very fundamental to both of those. How do you pivot to more professional management and growth that will ensure longer-term vitality of those businesses, those jobs, and essentially the investment that we're making? So really, it's all of those things that have made this a very successful program. On the volunteering front, Biz Plus, through Land O'Lakes implementation, has had about 35 different volunteers contributing about 1,400 volunteer days. Some of the value that was mentioned earlier, a little over $600,000 of value that the U.S. government realizes through the volunteer commitments to the Biz Plus program. So by all accounts, a very successful program. I had a chance to meet with the mission director when I was in Colombo, and as was mentioned in a conversation earlier today, they really appreciate the great work that's been done in Sri Lanka through this program.
Thanks so much. Ed, you mentioned one of our newer programs that just launched in Nigeria, a Feed the Future program to deal with the threat of aflatoxin there, which of course endangers lives and also stunts growth in children. It's a huge problem, not just in Nigeria, across Africa and in other parts of the developing world. Our partner there is Nestle, and hoping to have additional partners, as you mentioned. Although USAID and our organizations have for years been doing public-private partnerships, I think we're all still struggling to do them well. We are hoping that this new program will be a model. There is this idea that's out there. It's been coined by certainly the Shared Value Initiative called shared value. And it is this idea that companies will seek to solve social problems if they also find business opportunities in doing so. So I was wondering if you, Ed, and maybe some of you others have some ideas about that as an opportunity for us, and your thoughts in general about public-private partnerships.
Sure. Thank you, Angela. Beyond shared value, it's almost a shared necessity. The FAO has estimated that over $80 billion a year in investment in agriculture and agribusiness are necessary to continue to meet the world's food needs. And if you take USAID's and World Bank's combined investment in 2016, you get about $4 billion, which is about 5% of that figure. And so you can understand that the rest has to come from the private sector. So our partnership with Nestle is just a piece of the larger puzzle of public-private partnerships that will allow us to achieve food security. This partnership is, as you say, there's a challenge to get the public side and the private side together at the same table at the right time with the right program. And my hat's off to VEGA for having established that. You guys did a really good job. We are working on a very serious issue that is sort of a hidden health concern because aflatoxins are not visible, and they are very deleterious to maternal and child health and human health in general. And Nestle is particularly interested in mitigating the levels of aflatoxins and aluminum in their supply chain because they are producing, among other things, baby food in this factory in northern Nigeria. So they want their supply to be to meet the highest of standards, highest of global standards for aflatoxin and aluminum. And we're working through the Nigerian Volunteer Corps, a national volunteer corps that Nigeria has set up to cultivate volunteers and get them into the field to work with all members along the supply chain, farmers, working with aggregators, working with storage and transport providers to help them understand what they can do, their part in reducing aflatoxins in the supply chain. It takes the effort of the entire supply chain, not just one actor, to make sure that the maize and the soy, when it reaches the factory gates, are free or at least have minimal aflatoxin in them. So essentially, it's not only a partnership with the private sector such as Nestle or Olam, but all the smaller actors along the value chain. So we really appreciate the partnership, and thank you, Angela.
Thanks. Other thoughts? Land O'Lakes has been doing public-private partnerships in its own way for, as you said, many, many years, decades. So, John, as other companies are coming into the space and learning how to do what you've done for years, what advice might you have for them?
Well, I guess the advice we would share is that they're vital, and that probably goes without saying. You mentioned earlier they can be quite difficult to execute, but I do think we're kind of grounded in the belief that if we're going to achieve what Administrator Green has called for in terms of working ourselves collectively out of jobs as a wonderful intent, that is only going to happen if there's private sector take-up and engagement, so that the investments that are made through development are picked up and carried forward by the local private sector. It doesn't have to be global, it doesn't have to be global multinational types of partners. Often some of the best partners are those that are closer to the ground. We've experienced that in work that we've done in a number of countries, most recently some work in Bangladesh, where we're working with 3 of the primary local dairy companies to help ensure a successful outcome of a significant multi-year investment made in that sector in that country. And that's not a unique situation. That's the example, the typical example of the type of work that we and a lot of other implementers seek to do.
Great, thanks. I would like to open things up to the audience so that you can join in and ask some questions or make some comments. Thanks, Katie's coming to get the microphone to share with you. While you're thinking about those questions and raising your hands, I'll ask our panelists to talk a little bit about VISP, so the new initiative at USAID, which we have welcomed. What is your advice about how USAID and we all can help to make that a success? How can we achieve the very ambitious goals that were set forth in that APS? And what advice do you have for all of us in the room?
I'll jump in and say I first of all want to thank USAID for continuing to support and provide for a volunteer-focused program. As an organization, as I mentioned, that has a long history of leveraging volunteers outside our organization, but also within, where we use, for example, some of the highest potential members of our organization in what's called a talent acquisition program and put them out into these opportunities to learn about how to add value in these foreign markets and countries. To have walked away from volunteerism as a key component of our diplomatic portfolio, I think would have been a big mistake. So I think, first of all, it's thanks for doing that. I think the other thing that comes to mind immediately for me is you mentioned marketing, which is one of the ones that I was thinking, how do we ensure that the missions are well aware enough to make sure that they can match that tool to the need that they've got? We can be a voice, all of us implementers can be a voice in helping that happen, but we also need the weight of the organization to help push that forward. And then lastly, I would say speed. The need is there. The faster that we can move to these opportunities and finding ways to align resources to need, the better off we'll be.
If I might add one thought or two, I think volunteerism is almost unique to the United States. We've worked all over the world at FSVC and find that American citizens have this incredible desire to do good in the world and to really make a difference. And programs like VISP and other programs can harness the expertise and talents and energy and desire of U.S. citizens and really make a tremendous change in the world. I only have the viewpoint from FSVC, but as we've moved from crisis to crisis, financial crisis all around the world, for us to be able to draw on people like Paul Volcker, the former head of the RTC, Wall Street lawyers, accountants, investment bankers, the head of the Federal Reserve Bank of Kansas City, as we've worked in Afghanistan and Iraq and Middle East and now Somalia and Sub-Saharan Africa, to be able to bring talent and expertise like that to these critical situations is just incredibly important. And programs like VISP really have, I think, the ability to harness one of the unique assets of the United States and really do good in the world.
Angela, I just can't help but notice the number of cooperative organizations that are a part of VEGA and you know, listed on the slide there. You know, for credit unions, every member of a credit union board is a volunteer. Volunteerism runs very deep through the veins of the credit union system, and we've been able to leverage that for the program that I talked about, but I think there's an opportunity to leverage that volunteer spirit that exists in credit unions and in other cooperatives to the success of the program. And I just encourage continuing to draw on the expertise and volunteerism that the cooperative sector has.
Thanks so much. And you thought this was going to be a non-controversial panel, right? But I'm going to have to disagree with you, John, on one point. And I think that is that Americans are very generous, and we do volunteer at very high rates. I think we are second in the world, and I'm remembering it's Malaysia that I think beat us out. Someone will fact check that for me, I'm sure. Also, I would be remiss if I didn't mention our Canadian award winner this year. We do have partnerships with the Canadian Volunteer Corps as well as the Australian volunteers who are members of VEGA. So it is true that Americans are very generous of spirit, and we have a huge untapped resource. We have really only begun to scratch the surface of what the U.S. government can do to partner with American citizens. Are there any questions from the audience? Comments? Raise a hand. No? Okay, well then, oh, yes, up here. Wait for the microphone if you wouldn't mind. Thanks.
Thank you. Andrea Patrick from IESC. I actually have a question for Mr. Douglas. As you are the representative of sort of the day-to-day private sector engagement on the panel, how do you think, Mr. Douglas, that the private sector itself benefits from this engagement with this kind of international volunteerism, as well as, this sort of tripartite relationship with the government vis-a-vis USAID?
I can speak, I think, both from the point of view of FSVC as an organization and someone who has volunteered. I often tell people that I work for money because I need money. But I volunteer for FSVC out of love. These are extraordinarily interesting and fulfilling assignments that we get involved in, and I think have a remarkably big impact. And I don't know of a single volunteer, and we talk to them after their visits, but I don't know of a single one who has come back and expressed disappointment of having given and received more than he or she gave in that effort. And it's really true almost regardless of where they go, and in some senses regardless of what they do. We helped the government of Afghanistan establish a framework for their banks, such as they were, and introduce a currency after things more or less stabilized. The people that were involved were people from the accounting firms, from the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, from the Federal Reserve in Washington, lawyers from some of the big Wall Street firms, and others who had expertise and experience in these sort of matters, to the extent you can have experience in replacing creating a currency in a war-torn country. But they all came back with just these remarkable stories, remarkable experience that they could use in their own lives and in their own practices and their own business, but really having felt that they'd done something meaningful and worthwhile, more so really than what they do during their day jobs. So I just, this volunteer stuff that comes without an agenda and really only a desire to do good is remarkably fulfilling.
Can I piggyback on that answer? I would say we have seen a similar kind of response from the people that have gone out into the field. And to your question about how does it turn around and benefit American interests, apart from the kind of diplomatic interests that were mentioned earlier from a business person's perspective, I would say one of the key things is that it gives our employees who choose to volunteer a unique experience that in our company anyway, they would not generally get. And people line up for these things. They're highly competitive to win within our organization. And it makes it's one of the ways that we compete effectively with other organizations in our marketplace for the best of talent. It is the fact that we've been doing development in a farmer-owned cooperative for 40 years is something that every one of the people we interview talks about, wants to be a part of, wants to know how they can help. We've developed this concept we call the Foreign Legion of how do we activate these 10,000 employees in unique and new and different ways to bring their talents to bear in the work that USAID and others hire us to do. So I do think it is very fulfilling for the people who take part. It also is a very demonstrably beneficial thing for our organization where we can tap into our own talent base.
Thanks, John. Other questions, comments from the audience? You are keeping us on schedule. I like that. Oh, wait. Okay, please.
Hi, how are you? I'm Lauren Ruth, and I work with Land O'Lakes, my boss up there. I think to a question people spoke to a bit earlier, a comment I guess I have about what we can do to kind of further promote VISP as a mechanism or volunteerism. I think one of the things that has struck me since getting involved, and I work across all of our programs, but also quite closely with our farmer-to-farmer programming, is that I think all of us in this room have a really important role to play in the continuing education of the missions that we work with around the world, of the power of volunteerism. And I think all of our volunteer awardees that are here today, if you read their profiles in the very nice packet that VEGA put together, you see the caliber of people who are going out to volunteer. And I think a lot of people are struck and surprised by the fact that you're getting people who are the head of extension outreach for veterinary services in Minnesota, people who are the head of major cooperatives in the U.S., people who are at the top of their game in academia and private sector, who are part of global initiatives around rules and regulations around food quality and safety, and the networks that they have to plug back into. So I think there's that one piece. And I think also we can, better than others, talk through and iterate what are the models for these volunteer programs, because they look different and you can set them up differently. And I've found, I think that a lot of times our partners within USA are really open and looking to us to also talk about how these programs can take shape and be designed. So that's my comment. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Lauren. We really appreciate that. And I'll add to that, not to pick on you again, John Douglas, but you and our award winner, one of our award winners, and maybe several of them, I don't know that USAID could afford you without VEGA programs and our member organizations. And so there is that. There is the fact that these partnerships and the infusion of technical assistance that USAID gets is extraordinary. It's not to knock on consultants. They're great. We need them too. But it is different, that person-to-person diplomacy and the level of expertise that comes into these programs. Other questions? Another comment from the audience? While you all are thinking, I'm going to ask our panelists to maybe, there's some congressional staff in the audience who are obviously really interested in these programs and policies, and if you have some recommendations for them on how they can continue to be involved and make sure that they're successful.
Well, I would like to say that the APS as a construct in itself is very interesting in that it calls for you to bring your ideas to the table. And I know that USAID is exploring new mechanisms of funding and more innovative mechanisms than just the cooperative agreement, RFP, RFA issuance, and then receiving responses. And I think that going in that direction will untap some of the latent creativity within our own organizations that can improve our development effectiveness.
That's a great point.
Great, thanks.
I would just encourage everyone to make sure that the procurement process at USAID, whether it's through a program like this or in general, gives opportunities to contractors of all sizes, particularly smaller contractors. There is a lot that can be done by organizations of all sizes, and when you're able to leverage volunteers, as the credit union system and the cooperative systems have done in so many places. I spoke about Ukraine, but we've also done some fantastic work in Poland and Afghanistan and Kenya and other places. You can make a real difference. You know, diplomacy takes a number of different forms, and the work that we all are doing in various areas is really critical to the economic development there.
Thanks, Ryan. And by small contractors, I'm sure you also mean small NGOs.
Yes.
Yes. Okay.
I would just say for the congressional staff teams in the room, if there are any, I guess my message would be keep up the fight. These programs broadly that we're talking about are under a lot of debate, as everyone's well aware of, in terms of overall funding levels. It's vital that we continue to push our members of Congress to support. We've had the champions that have been with us today, but not everyone's a champion. So how do we continue to advocate effectively for the financial support that's needed to move these programs forward. I think volunteer-related programs are some of the best of the bunch because it truly is kind of a win-win-win. Obviously, the U.S. government gets to serve its interests and to do so at a discount, so to speak. The U.S. organizations, often private sector ones that are involved, get a win, as I spoke of earlier. And lastly, the recipients, because they're on the end of the good end of this terrific, experienced help that they would have almost no ability to lever if it wasn't brought to them through these programs. So, whatever help any of us can provide to help you influence your member of Congress that you work with or the surrounding group, we'd be happy to help.
I would say that these volunteer-based organizations are extraordinarily powerful in their impact. And again, I speak a bit for FSVC, but I think I speak a bit for all of the volunteer-based organizations. We've worked in 65 countries over the course of the 25 years we've been in existence. And I suspect in every one of those countries, we can pick up the phone and talk to the head of the central bank or the minister of finance or the head of the major banks in those countries. I don't know of any dollars that Congress could spend that could possibly have more impact and more benefit for the United States than having these volunteers establish close personal relationships with decision makers, reformers, and others in these countries. I mean, it is extraordinary what can be done here. So to reemphasize keep going is really what I'd like to do.
Thanks so much. I want to thank all of our panelists for a really interesting dialogue and want to offer to all of you to please stay for our networking reception to continue the conversation. Thanks so much, gentlemen.
Thank you.